Okay, great. Looks like we're on YouTube now. If there's no objections, I will go ahead and open the meeting. Call us to order for the meeting of the Recreation Committee for Tuesday, September 6th, 2022. A Tuesday for a lot of us. It feels like a Monday, and we do appreciate our employees, those who were asked to work over the holiday weekend. But I hope everybody had a good holiday weekend, and thank you all for joining in today, and thank you for traffic and transportation for kind of switching times. Jennifer in the clerk's office has us set up where we're going to be meeting the third Tuesday, I think, of each month now on a regular basis. That way, she's done that with all committees where we're on a regular schedule. So, if he would, I will call on Councilman Gregory to either give us a moment of silence or a prayer, please.
Mr. Chairman, let's take a moment of silence. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. All right, and next on the agenda is the approval of minutes from May 23rd, 2022.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Okay, I have all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So next on the agenda, we have our master plan discussion, and Amy has done a great job of putting together a presentation for us on the master plan. So Amy, if you would, please.
Sure. Good afternoon. Just to go through where we are on the master plan real quick. Currently, and if you all remember in 2021, when it was completed, we a referendum was considered, and council wanted to have a workshop to develop a plan on the projects, but we never scheduled that meeting. That meeting never happened. So in the meantime, Jason and Lori, in concert with the consultants, went through the entire plan, which is extensive, as I think you all know, and came up with some projects that would be representative of all of our boroughs, if you want to call it. They were calling them planning districts, and kind of that was where we're going to start the conversation with council at the workshop to kind of go through and figure out which projects we thought were the biggest and highest priorities. If you remember, the full master plan was about $177 million in projects. What Jason and Lori had come up with was about 117 million. And like I said, it was representative of each of the planning districts. So for Peninsula projects, these were the projects that they pulled out from the entire huge master plan. Total cost for Peninsula projects, just for those projects that they pulled out, was $20 million. And those were the projects. It was Corinne Jones, McMahon Playground, Coach Stanley Chisholm Park, and Shaw Community Center, Brittle Bank Park, and White Point Garden. I'll just keep going through the districts and let me know if I'm going too fast, if you have any questions. And like I said, this was just for kind of a first stab at what staff's kind of their knowledge of what might be the most high priority, just for a discussion. It wasn't anything that had been decided at all. It's just, like I said, for us to bring forward as to start the discussion on what the priority projects would be. I think I skipped. Did I? No, I didn't. West Ashley projects. It's about $46 million in projects. Is Forest Acres, which is really the pool, because we all know that the pool needs a lot of work, not a fully new pool. Willie Gaines Playground, Ackerman Park, Park Shore Park, Inner West Ashley Recreation Center, Woodland Park, Bear Swamp and Long Savannah, and then improvements to the Charleston Tennis Center. So the biggest items there were Forest Park, which is really a new aquatic center, and 2 new recreation centers, the Inner West Ashley Recreation Center and Bear Swamp and Long Savannah Recreation centers. Okay, we'll move on to James Island. And those projects were the Harborview, Fort Johnson Park, James Island Recreation Complex, some expansion to the Low Country Senior Center, and Ferguson Village Park and expansion. And then we had Johns Island projects, because we really don't have, we have our park on Johns Island, but we don't have a recreation facility. What was recommended was a recreation center and an aquatic facility. We have purchased land adjacent to where our current property is, and which we can utilize for any further expansion. There's one more parcel, so really the land acquisition cost that's included in here has already been covered. We purchased land for 1.274 million. There's one other smaller parcel that we would like to purchase if it were to come up for sale that would help with just a little bit extra land for the expansion, but that hasn't really come up yet. And then we also purchased land with the large lake. That was the Griffith property, if y'all remember, which will someday be like a nature park with water amenities like kayaking and fishing, etc. So those are two things that we have done for Johns Island so far. Okay. And Canehoy, that's really kind of up in the air right now. They had $500,000 to acquire land in the master plan, and they were hoping for some partnership with the Greenbelt program. Those discussions haven't been super successful thus far, but we're still working on that. And then once we get a better plan in place, obviously we'll need a recreation facility up there as well. We just don't have any cost estimates so far. And then there was one whole section of citywide projects as well. And these were some of the more imminent things: court replacement, field improvements, fitness equipment for outdoors in the parks, lawn, master planning, which we've already covered, parking improvements. There was a lot of extra citywide projects, which we need to have a bigger discussion about. Some of those costs are already budgeted for in parks operating budget. So we just need to really kind of look through all of those and determine what is the best path forward for those items. Any questions on any of that? Okay. So in this past, when we closed out our 2021 fiscal year, we had some additional funding that we always usually put towards capital project items. So we have allocated some funding towards some of the items that we just went over. So I just wanted to kind of highlight those. We have put funding away or aside for Coach Stanley Chisholm Park. That hasn't been fully allocated yet. We are reconsidering adding lights because that was part of the master plan. So we're getting a cost estimate on that. But right now we have allocated that funding that will go toward it will go on the capital improvement plan, which we're trying to finalize, and we'll bring that back later. The Shaw Community Center, I'll let Jason and Lori talk about that a little bit. There's a $1.6 million cost to that in the master plan. We have $500,000 allocated towards that from just leftover funds that we have from 2021 for an interior renovation. It didn't include all of the improvements that were included in the master plan, like the elevator, things like that, and outside improvements, but this will take care of the interior renovation without the elevator. Riddlebank Park, we have allocated $1 million, but that is only for the all access playground improvements. And then White Point Garden, we had 406,000 budgeted in our 2022 hospitality budget for restrooms. Any questions on any of that? West Ashley projects. We have allocated $825,000 for Ackerman Park and a little over $1 million for Park Shore Park. The main scope for that $1 million is for pickleball courts, which changes the scope a little bit, and it would not include the tennis and basketball court improvements. And then the Charleston Center Tennis Center, we have $175,000 allocated for lights. Any questions? Okay. For James Island, we have $100,000 put away just for the shade structure for the pool. One thing to point out with this is that we also have money allocated for Fort Pemberton, which was included in the master plan. We have $100,000 just to get the work started out there, but we also have Greenbelt funds, and we're anticipating getting additional grant funding for that project. And then also for Plymouth Park, it's included on the master plan, but wasn't on this list that Lori and Jason had come up with, but we're also allocating funding for that park in concert with contributions from the neighborhood. So those are two additional projects on James Island that we are allocating funding towards. They just hadn't been part of the first prioritization that Lori and Jason had put together. Any questions on that? Okay, and then citywide, we for field improvements, if you remember, we allocated $150,000 in ARPA funds for field improvements. So that is some funding that we put away for that. And then master planning, that was part of this contract, and we have the funding for that portion of the contract with the consultants for that. So right now, just utilizing 2021 general fund reserves, we have allocated about $5.2 million toward projects included in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And that doesn't include the other projects that I had mentioned, Plymouth Park, and Fort Pemberton, and the Griffith track and the Ross track that we bought on Johns Island. So future funding considerations, we have general fund reserves that we've already allocated, future bond and tourism funds. Just wanted to, that's kind of my key that I had earlier in the presentation, which I probably should have pointed out that I didn't, so I apologize. But we noted several lesser cost projects that we could probably fund with general fund reserves, which totaled about $3.5 million. I'll just go back so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm sorry. So those that I highlighted in green, I feel like those could be things that we fund in future with future general fund reserves because they're lower dollar amounts. So there were several of those throughout this that I had. So the Crin Jones playground, that's probably something we could fund with future general fund reserves. Willie Gaines playground, some of these smaller renovations projects we could probably fund with future general fund reserves. Harborview Fort Johnson Park, now some of that we've already got. Is it coming, Jason, this coming, or was it the past council meeting that this next coming council meeting that you'll see a grant acceptance for Harborview Fort Johnson Park? So we're already starting some with that with grant funding. And then Ferguson Village Park and expansion is a smaller dollar amount too that we could probably fund with future general fund reserves. And same with when I was talking about the citywide projects, some of these like the field improvements, we budget agricultural supplies in the parks budget every year in their operation budget. We do court replacement as well in their operating budget. some of these things we need just to look at and have a good replacement plan and start planning for those every year and really look at the funding that we're providing or budgeting for now. See if we need to use some general fund reserves to get caught up from wherever we may during the pandemic have cut back a little bit and just get a good feel for what we should be budgeting on an annual basis for those items, if that makes sense. Any questions? Sorry, I'm going to go back forward. So that was the same with when you go through all of these that we went through. Might as well just go back and do this.
Amy, Mayor Tecklenburg has a.
I'm sorry, Mayor.
Yeah, no problem. So when you say those citywide items like $3.7 million for bathrooms, I presume the plan, it was specific as to where those restrooms would be, wasn't it? I mean, this is just a summary, but the plan had this pretty well detailed as to what needed to be done where, correct?
Jason, I'll let you kind of talk about that.
Yes, the citywide projects did identify locations for new, but it also focused on deferred maintenance type projects. So whether it was like so in those line items, parking improvements or playground replacements, shade structures, sometimes are new or just sometimes need capital style maintenance. Site furniture would include backstop fencing that was constructed but never replaced and are all very shabby. So it's a little bit everywhere. But yes, it had identified specific locations for restroom structures.
Right. So that wasn't new, right, Jason? That's just upgrades and
That's right.
renovating the current things that we have.
That's right.
So if I may just finish out, on the funding side, there was probably only a couple of examples that I could think of, but there might be a couple that TIF funding would be eligible or available for a few of these projects. Do you know, did you think about that?
I did. I don't think any
Riddle
of
Bank is the one that comes to my mind, but
yeah, because of the development agreement we had though. So most of these on this list, Mayor, there are some other in the master plan that we could consider TIF funding for, but most of the ones that we included in here, I don't think there's TIF funding available anytime soon anyway.
yeah. And so of course you have the big ticket items in blue for a bond. Ultimately, we have to pay back the bond with general funds or some source of funding. So have you put any thought into what size bond we might realistically be able to float, for lack of a better term?
Yes, I have that coming out. So I'll just kind of move forward with this. So like those things that I had shaded, so the general fund reserves, the 3.5 million, we could probably cover with that. 100% of the Way Forward Garden project could be funded with hospitality funds. So that would be an additional 694,000. I think we have 406 put away right now. And then some portion of Riddle Bank could also be funded with tourism, possibly 25%. That would be another $3 million. So total amount with tourism funds could be about almost 3.8 million if we're looking at that. So if we were for the bonding cost for the items that are big ticket items that we could fund, we would probably want to get a bond for. These were the items that we talked about. If we just took one project from each of the planning districts. I'm sorry, Jason, you want to say something?
Oh, no, I was
okay.
Water, sorry.
That's would be what it would look like. So Brittle Bank Park would be about $8.2 million. I feel like I missed something, but I guess I didn't. Forest Park, that's the full 12.3, the 4.2 million for James Island Rec, It was originally 4.3, but we've already put $100,000 away for that. The rental bank was the 12.3 less the amount that we could do in hospitality funds. So I took other funding options and subtracted that from the total amount basically of the project. And then the Johns Island, I kept the land acquisition cost in there only because of that other parcel. I wasn't sure if we were able to obtain it, how much that might be. So I just left that amount in there to be on the safe side. So it'd be about $44 million in the first bond that we would get for this master plan.
I think Councilman Saccharin has his hand raised, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question, I guess. Maybe this is not the time, but I know, Jason, you and I chatted about, there's a piece of land over in West Ashley on Shelley Ave, it's like a pocket park that they wanted to create. Do we set aside some money for like these types of, one-offs where, Jason needs some discretionary funding to do some of that? Just wondering where in the budget that lands. And Jason, you and I chatted about that. You remember, do you recall that conversation?
I do, but you'll have to remind me on Shelley, the actual location.
All right, I'll follow up with you after this, but I think one of the things I heard back from you was, just don't have it in the budget, but this would have been a very small ask, basically just to clean up that little parcel of land and basically create a green space for the neighborhood. But that was one question. The other question, I'll wait till Lori comes on and does more of the rec piece, but thank you.
So with those types of things, Councilmember Saccharin, we wouldn't actually budget for that in an operating budget, in our general fund budget. Those would come through, usually through the mayor's office, asking, when we're kind of allocating this funding would come through that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, this is just an example based on, what they have put together last year. It's just for further discussion. Obviously, we need to bring this forward to make sure everybody's on board with the prioritization of projects, but it's just an example. So I think next steps would be to schedule that full council workshop to go through the master plan. And like I said, what Jason and Lori and the consultant have put together would be a starting point to that conversation, and then strategize how the projects can be funded once we prioritize those projects. We need to obviously consider our current debt and when the bond can be procured based on the current debt obligations that we have. 2024, we do have some debt coming off, so that could be a possibility, which might, if we were to do a referendum, it would kind of all fall in line together, because that would be November 2023, and then an option to bond in 2024. So just as an example. But we would need a listing of the projects to include in the referendum, and that needs to be finished by August of 2023. So
I think Councilmember Parker has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm sorry, y'all, my internet dropped, but I may be going a little bit backwards, but I didn't see anything. So the plan that you just showed me, those are sort of the priorities that were already drafted, written out in the plan, because I didn't see anything for, Stephen Washington Park. Medway, I get that Fort Pem, that's not in my district anyway, but Westchester Park as well on James Island. So first, why are all parks, so like Stephen Washington, for example, is that not on the list because it's not a priority, or?
So like I said in the beginning, this was just kind of a list that, just based on, and Jason, Lori, you speak to this because I was not a part of this part of it. It was just kind of a conversation starter. So it's not like anything was necessarily left out on purpose or anything. It was just their knowledge of the prioritizations based on what they're hearing in the community and based on what the consultants' work did. And Jason, Lori, jump in wherever. Yeah.
So we went through each district based on the plan and pulled out some kind of big ticket, kind of regional kind of items that would serve more than just each district. The one line item which is citywide improvements, would take some of those older park locations, knowing that there's lots of deferred maintenance everywhere. And then through a process with the council, we could determine, what types of park improvements, whether they're turf improvements, shade structure improvements, fencing, replacement of old fencing, improvements to ADA access with walkways and parking lots. So there was a line item or a page in there that identified needs throughout the entire city that were less project specific that we would hope to fund through this process.
Okay, and that was sort of the second part of my question. So in the line item, you might have been speaking about so field improvements. So when you just say you have, field improvements, again, where's the prioritization list of, what fields are we improving? I mean, as you said, there's a ton of deferred maintenance. I mean, all of the ball fields, whether it's lines, dirt, landscaping, whatever, is that part of that line item, field improvements? And if so, what allotted monies are going where?
Right. Well, like Amy said, this is kind of the start of the process to develop that prioritization plan. We know we have needs in every single park. We know we can't get it all done in 1, 5, or 10 years. So we just have to come up with the plan, whether it's through a workshop and determine what the needs are. We know what the needs are, but then we need to look at programming and see what locations are programmed mostly, where are the highest needs based on the social needs and conditioning index, and then the actual usage. So some of those places that you identify, our recreation programs don't program there. So typically we try to focus our daily maintenance based on the programming list of our recreation department. So they issue us a weekly schedule that says, this is where our games are held. These are the priorities for that daily type maintenance stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And Councilmember Parker, I'll kind of jump in on that point. So the way we determine our schedule is, where do we have lights? Where do we have fields that have got irrigation and are going to be maintained in that way, so that when the community comes out to play soccer games, for instance, they're playing on lighted fields that have irrigation and have had, chemical treatments and things like that. We don't have the ability to schedule on all of our fields, number one, because they're not all kept at that same point, because some of them may not be competitive fields, but also the way we schedule our recreation staff. If I've got soccer games at 5 locations, I don't have enough staff for that. If I play all the games at Bayview, then I can handle 5 fields at Bayview going at one time with the staffing level we have. So that's kind of how the schedule comes to the Parks Department, is where I have regional facilities that can handle multiple games, multiple cars being parked there, restrooms that are there, lights that are there, and enough room to spread out and use. That's kind of how we've done that in each of our boroughs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks. And I don't know how it's working in other parts of the city, but I know over here on James Island. So y'all please tell me what West Ashley looks like. I mean, we have the field space, we can accommodate the people that sign up. Sometimes we have enough coaches, sometimes we don't. But again, not having these fields maintained, I think, is the problem. So again, all right. Can I ask one more question about the bond referendum, Amy?
Sure.
So when and if you do this, is it citywide or is it area specific?
It's a citywide referendum. That would be citywide.
So it
So
would.
anybody that goes to the polls to vote would vote on that referendum if they wanted to.
So it's just a parks and recreation referendum. It's not, it's really not tied to like specific items or locations or anything like that.
Well, usually when you have a referendum like that on the ballot, then you would have to have some type of project list or something like that usually is included with it on the referendum.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
Okay,
Councilmember Gregory, were you trying to get our attention?
And I was going back to a response that Amy gave a little earlier to try to respond to some of the concerns that Councilmember Parker has. And it really goes back to the answer that was given to Councilmember Saccharin. Some of the things that I think are concerns, Councilmember Parker, are things that may be able to be funded out of the operating budget and not necessarily the bond referendum. And correct me if I'm wrong, Amy.
no, that's right. I think we need to look through more of those citywide items. Like Jason said, well, he didn't say this, Jason and I were talking about this, and Lori, the pandemic, when we went through the budget cuts in 2020 and all of that, we just need to kind of look at where we are in those budgets and what we cut back. I know we've been trying to put those funds back, but just having the issues that we've had the last couple of years, we just need to look at it to see what do we need to do to try to get caught up? What does that look like? And how much is a good, I hate to say price point, but you know what I mean, in terms of making sure we have the right amount budgeted annually to allow them to get the job done, if that makes sense.
And that would be the time for for council members. I mean, like, for instance, Councilmember Parker mentioned Westchester. And we all know that Westchester has been requesting lighting out there for years. Understand that there are other issues in the park that needs to be addressed. But much of what I see over there are things that can be taken care of through the operating budget, if as a council member, we recommend accordingly.
Right, and even if it's lighting in a smaller dollar amount project too, Councilmember Gregory, that, we might be able to handle with general fund reserves, we would want to think about that too. Save the bond for the big ticket items.
Exactly.
And you come up with a good plan, like have a 5-year plan, 10-year plan on what we're going to do or try to accomplish as well.
And if I could just add one point to that, identifying and funding projects is one thing, but you have to have the people to do the work, and that's where we're struggling across the board. You all know that. So we can identify money for field improvements and fertilization and infield repairs, but you've got to have the people to do the work. Right now, we're 30% down staff. So even if we had all the money in the world, we couldn't get the daily maintenance done. So that's why we use the recreation department's schedule of programming and follow them around the city to try to keep everything maintained in the fields and parks that are actually being used from a recreational competitive basis.
Councilmember Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, to that point, Mr. Kronzberg, I mean, this is where, when do we start looking at, the private sector collaborations? I mean, that is a huge problem that we're having in Parks and Rec. So when do we start looking at sort of those next steps? As I understand that we can identify the money, but if we continue on this, we just can't do it because of staffing. I mean, when are we going to look at, obviously there have been other instances where the private sector and the public sector have worked together on these improvements, but when are we going to, really look into that as far as some of this deferred maintenance goes? I mean, we have the space, we have the fields. You're saying, if we can pinpoint the money, how can we get to that next step of, finding maybe people from the private sector to collaborate with us, whether they're sponsors or whether they're, whatever they might be, to help us, with the upkeep of these fields, so citizens can use them.
I mean, that's a great question and great points. As far as collaboration with the private sector goes, right now, like some of these satellite and more neighborhood parks that don't get scheduled and structured programming, we just don't have the ability to take care of them. If we want to identify contract maintenance and have private contractors come out and maintain these other parks that don't get as heavily used, then again, that's another effort in funding and budgeting. You know, we can our contract maintenance program has grown considerably over the last 10 years to supplement what we're able to do in-house. We have probably $1 million a year that goes to contract maintenance throughout the city. So for instance, all of our Daniel Island athletic field and park maintenance is done by contracts because we don't have the staff to go to Daniel Island and provide that maintenance on a daily basis. And it works pretty well, but it's a considerable sum of money. And if we determine what our priorities are from, these smaller satellite or neighborhood park locations, and there's requests for usage, we can look at that. But again, it's a budgeting and funding mechanism.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. May I ask, Mr. Mayor, if it's an appropriate time, is this something that we could see about, the town and or the county, just collaborate, some type of collaborative effort, especially with the town here on James Island?
Well, we collaborated with them in the creation of a park over on Folly Road, so we're certainly open to that. If you got a specific project or idea in mind, let's talk about it.
Okay, thanks.
Generally speaking, yes.
Mayor Tecklenburg, you may also recall that that we work with the town of James Island so that if a town resident signs their child up for one of our youth sports, that the town reimburses the city back for the out of residency costs, so that all the kids on James Island play for the same price. So we already work with those folks that way. One of the challenges, Councilmember Parker, is that there are more residents, period, on James Island than there are facilities. So right now, I can't add any new USTA teams at Maybank Tennis Center, whether they're city or non-city or anything else. I just don't have enough court space. So we really start getting kind of hammered in that direction. But we have been working with the town of James Island, and I think that's a great idea to continue to reach out to them.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Councilman Gregory.
Going back to Councilmember Parker, in terms of the issue of staffing, and it's just not our parks and recreation, but it's across the board. And in that regard, as chairman of Human Resources, I've been going to the various department heads, sort of discussing things that they've already discussed with the mayor, of course, but discussing, thinking outside the box in terms of how do we staff up so that we can address the issue of staffing, which affects the maintenance of many of the places that you just described. And so far, I've had those meetings with 2 departments, and the next scheduled meeting in that regard would be with Parks and Recreation. And hopefully through brainstorming and discussions, we may be able to come up with an outside the box way of perhaps trying to staff up so that the kinds of maintenance issues, and I think they're all legitimate questions, by the way, can be addressed to the best ability based upon staffing. So there are ongoing discussions because the issue is staffing, and not just in recreation and parks, but across the board. And I think until we really figure out what we need to do in that area to try to staff up as much as we can, I think we'll be talking about this again next year. So I'm with you. We've got to find a way of staffing up our various departments so that they can address many at least some of the issues that you raise as concerns. And I think they're the concerns of all of us. And let's not go to environmental services, ditch digging. So, I mean, I hear you. And as the chairman of Human Resources, those dialogues have started and hopefully will result in some kind of progress. I appreciate your question as well.
Thank you, Councilman Gregory. Okay. Anyone
I'm
else?
done.
Okay.
The only other thing I'd like to say about all of that too is if, our capital improvement plan is probably one of the biggest capital improvement plans of any municipality. So we have a lot of bigger projects going on too, which kind of falls on parks as well. So some of it is yes, staffing, of course, but it's also the number of projects that we have too. So
Yeah, they are building the International African American Museum.
and the bridge across the Ashley River,
Bridge
those are
across
some
the
pretty
Ashley
big
River.
projects.
Yes, I can go on.
Yeah. So I mean, you just look at our capital improvement plan. It's pretty big. Fire stations, we got all kinds of stuff going on. So anyway, just everybody keep that in mind. There's a lot of responsibility there. So anyway, I think that's really all I had. If anybody has any other questions. Again, just remember this was kind of something that was put together to start the conversation. So nothing's set in stone at all.
Right. Mayor Tecklenburg?
Yeah, I just want to make the observation based on the discussion here today, which has been very good, that it seems to me we ought to almost create two priority lists. One, the big stuff, like the $10, $12 million items, and prioritize which ones of those are most important and that we would like to see, the sooner rather than later. Those are the ones that likely would get funded through a bond. And then another one that deals with some of these smaller park improvements, lighting, a restroom here or there, so as mentioned during the discussion, but just to make clear, those are things that from year to year, we can kind of knock off. And I've been doing that personally, just listening to y'all and hearing from citizens, that's how we came up with some of the things that we recently recommended, like the Maybank lights for the Maybank and the light for the Charleston Tennis Center and the funding for the pickleball courts over at North Shore. So that's how we came up with that $5 million worth of stuff that's on the books right now was just by a process of listening to y'all and prioritizing what staff recommended, and it would be helpful to me, I think, and to our planning efforts for council to kind of look at both of those areas, big projects, and then the little stuff as well, up to $500,000.
Can I add something to that as well? Because Jason and I were talking too. If you really look through the big spreadsheet of all of the projects on the master plan, like right here for just West Ashley. So Councilmember Parker, this kind of goes to James Island too. There's already several things on there that were already funded or mostly funded. Like for West Ashley, we have the Charleston Firefighter Memorial that's fully funded. Mulberry Pond Park, you've got Carl Richardson, the Folly Road Boulevard Park, Wapu Road, that's WPAL. We have the bikeway and the greenway. So all of those projects are on the master plan, and we've already funded most of them. So I think when we get together, to have this conversation, just looking at the bigger spreadsheet to know every project that's already has funding allocated to it, because this presentation here is just a very small part of it and just things that we've kind of pulled out, probably more newer projects, but there's a lot more that we're already currently doing that, for this master plan. It's already in progress. So I think we just need to, when we sit down really go through that whole entire list so everybody can see exactly what we're doing. Because if you, like I said, if you look at our capital improvement plan, it's pretty big. And a lot of those items are included in this master plan.
And it may be good to show those that have already been completed. For instance, the Susie Jackson Freedom Memorial Garden downtown, it's completed. So I think showing what has been accomplished would also, I think, probably be refreshing to see how much work our capital and parks and recreation have completed.
Okay, well, we can kind of do that for the, if we have the workshop, if that's where we want to go next with this.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this? Well, Amy, thank you very much. A lot of work in a little bit of time, and it's very, very much appreciated. So thank you so much for all your hard work on this, along with Jason and Lori. Thank y'all for putting that presentation together. It was a good conversation. So I very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so moving on to, let's see, the municipal golf course restrooms and pavilions we have on there, pavilion and restrooms. Obviously been a discussion, and we had a presentation 2 meetings ago, I guess, and just put this on here for discussion at this time. And Jason, can I call on you to talk about it a little bit?
Yes. So based on some of the most recent discussions regarding the municipal golf course, we have worked with the golf course. We've identified the utility locations, the Charleston water systems, wastewater lines, and we've come up with locations, and we are working on cost estimations for the addition of those restrooms onto the course. And so right now that's kind of where we are. And we've got a model that the Charleston County PRC has just constructed in one of their parks. And we're gonna, again, cost estimate it and bring it back to everyone for their consideration.
Any other questions on that item? All right, we'll move forward then.
Hey, Jason. Yeah, maybe not on this call, but I'd like to get together with you and see where we are with the park in Longborough, the little small park. Okay, we'll talk about it. Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda, I'll call on Lori to talk to us about annual passes for swimmers and tennis players over the age of 90.
Thank you, Chairman Shealy. So this has come up in the last couple of weeks. I've gotten a request in order to support and really celebrate those folks that are using our swimming pools and our tennis facilities who are over the age of 90. I got a request for us to consider giving a free annual pass to those folks. It's not a huge number of folks over the age of 90, but it's time right now as we start every September 1st to pay your annual pass for the pool and for their tennis centers. And we've got a couple of folks, one of which is a 94-year-old swimmer that swims 4 mornings a week. And really that's the poster of what Parks and Recreation are. It's having a great place, affordable place, a safe place, easy to get to place to go exercise and stay young. And so anyway, I think it's a great idea. We could certainly celebrate those folks. I don't think it's that much of a cost loss for us. It's actually more of a thing to say, hey, I hope I make it to 90 and I'll save myself that $100. So I had asked if we could put this on the agenda and have you all make a recommendation that we do that for the tennis centers. That would be Maybank and Charleston Tennis Center, and our swimming pool passes. And really this is going to impact right now less than 5 people, but it's a great way of saying, hey, our seniors have been exercising and coming out with us, and we want to celebrate them.
Well, I think it's a great idea also. Is that something that has to be brought before council, or is that just something that we just need the blessing of this committee? We know.
I think if you go ahead and do it and then we just report it out and accept the report, I think we could go ahead and move that. There's some notes from 1991 in city council records, which was, believe it or not, before I got here, where city council looked at doing some things like this for city employees. And so those things became a part of the minutes, and it's allowed me to understand how city council had wanted city employees to be able to use our recreation, parks and recreation facilities as well.
Okay. Councilman Gregory?
So moved. I'm sorry.
Second.
All right. All in favor of moving this forward, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. And next, I mean, we've already kind of talked a little bit about staffing, but I want to call on Lori, if she would, and just give us a little update on recreation staffing.
Thank you. We continue to struggle to keep everything fully staffed. I'm at about 40% across the city right now, and where we're seeing the biggest need is in our part-time staffing. Obviously, there's just not a lot of folks right now, given the way the world is, looking for part-time work. And that's really how we have been able to have our buildings and pools and programs run 6 days a week, 7 days a week, at night, in the mornings, all those things. So one of the things we're working on now is cobbling together some of our part-time positions to create some full-time positions, to see if we can hire some more full-time people that will be able to give us some more flexibility. But we're almost to the point now where we take registration, like in youth sports, for every child that registers within a certain date. We take those kids and we make teams, and then we have anything else is after the date wait list. But if we continue to have this kind of vacancy, I'm not going to be able to staff the way we have before. And I don't want to limit participation, especially in youth sports, for those things. So we're doing everything in our power to play at places where I can have multiple staff together, where we can supervise safely and still have things going. But, I continue to watch, and I see Councilmember Saccharin signs up $12 to $15 an hour for after school care. And it's the same struggle we're having. It's just those part-time people are not out there looking for jobs right now. But our full-time people are still putting in great work. And I just hope none of them tell me to go pound sand anytime soon, because they're doing great work and I want to keep them doing that.
Thank you, Lori. Jason, or Councilman Saccharin?
Thank you, Kevin, or Councilmember Shealy. Lori, so I guess, yeah, we're experiencing the same plight at school district. And it took me a year last year to get our folks to that 12 to 15 range, because we were at the 10 to 11 and 12 range. I'm actually got a follow-up meeting with our new superintendent next week. I'm going to ask for more, so we can be closer to that $17 and $18 range, which is where the market is right now. So my question to you, Lori, is I think this is Councilman Gregory's point. As you guys are discussing the budget for next year, are you making a recommendation to increase the hourly wages for your part-time staff?
Well, thanks to the council's vote last meeting, you took about 170 of my employees up to $15 an hour, or a little above that, depending on where their threshold is. I know that HR is looking across the board at those things and meeting with Councilmember Gregory and the HR committee. I know Amy Wharton, as our CFO, has been looking at that. I mean, $15 an hour is great, but I haven't seen a change in the number of people applying for positions since you all did that. But I'm hoping it's the start of something bigger. But we are definitely not getting a lot of new folks applying, and I'm starting to lose coordinators who are those people at that 30 to 40 range. And those folks are going to other places. So it's really that whole squeeze. It's got to be a whole change, if you will, for what we're doing, and creating those opportunities that are going to get students and college students and maybe tri-tech students those experiences they need for career things. But yeah, it's the same problem you're having. And I don't see it changing any, but I know the city is looking at it as a whole. I don't normally, when staff does a budget, Councilmember Stackern, I don't put in for additional dollars for staffing. That's looked at as the whole. But I did ask for all of our pre-COVID budgeting to go back to to have all that money put back in the budget. Our numbers are back up, and we need all those dollars that we had pre-COVID to offer the same programs and activities and events. So.
Thank you, Lori.
Jason Kronsberg.
Yeah, and just to follow up, is Parks and Recreation are together, right? And I mentioned this earlier, but out of the 158 budgeted positions we have in the Parks Department, I have 48 openings. Now that crosses between facilities maintenance, capital projects, and grounds maintenance. 21 of those are directly related to park and athletic field maintenance. So it runs the breadth of what we offer. And our number one priority in our budget request was increased salaries and wages.
And hopefully, when council member, Chairman Shealy and I sit and meet with you guys, we have to really think outside the box. And I have some ideas, okay?
Thank you, Councilman Gregory.
Councilmember Greggy, you let me know when you want to meet and talk about salaries. I'll clear my calendar for you.
Oh, we will. Mono be calling you.
Thank you, sir.
Set it up, okay?
Councilmember Parker.
Yes, thank you, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is our coordinator gone on James Island, correct?
That's
Laurie?
correct. Our athletic coordinator left to go be the coordinator at Goose Creek for a much higher salary and having many less children to serve. So we are working on that, though. We think we've got someone offered. We had just filled an adult sports coordinator position, and so now we're back down a position, but we're working hard on that. We think we have some solutions.
Okay, and sorry, I have kind of three questions, but so obviously we rely on our volunteer coaches really to take care of those teams. But you're saying that so who's out there now? If we lost our coordinator, is there enough staff for these teams to be out there practicing? And this kind of circumvents my question as to why we have all these fields, but we aren't utilizing them for practice. Is it because practice has to be held with recreation folks on site, like at Bayview?
Okay, that's a great question. So practices don't have to have staff present as much. Certainly games do, though, because we want to make sure where we've got parents that I've got safety features. I've got someone with an AED, somebody that's CPR certified. I also want to have a staff person that can immediately get a hold of 911 if we have a police or fire emergency. So that's paramount for where we hold games. You could have practices at some other spots. But the reason why we try to do things like Bayview or James Island Rec Center in your two cases is because I have restrooms and I have ample parking. What happens a lot of times in a Stephen Washington Park, if we send teams there, there's not paved parking, so there may not be enough parking areas. There's a portalet, people aren't happy. It just kind of starts going snowballing like that. So that's why we do that. But yes, our volunteer coaches are the ones that are the absolute. If we didn't have volunteer coaches, we wouldn't be able to do any of this. But the coordinator is the one that gets them field times, gets their rosters, make sure they have the supplies. When the uniforms are done, we get them uniforms. We make sure that everything runs smoothly. So that's where I have a coordinator on site on a Saturday at Bayview when we have 10 fields going at one time. And so that's the importance of that person. We will have someone, whether it's Robin Cooper, whether it's me, whether it's Allison Weaver, we'll have someone from within our staff out doing those things when we start. But we did lose our coordinator on James Island.
Okay. All right. And Jason Kronsberg, so 21, we have 21 vacancies for the park and athletic field maintenance. So this is exactly what I was talking about before. So like you already have it set up for Daniel Island. How much is that how much, and maybe this might be a question for Amy, what are our savings there for those 21 positions that we have left unfilled? And can we outsource some of this maintenance for the city fields?
Those are some of the
I'll
discussions.
try to answer that. Based on recreation programming, right? We could put contracts out there for athletic field maintenance. Answering the question on salary savings and how it's funded is an Amy answer, but included in those 48 open positions is a contract manager. So you really have to keep an eye on the contractors. You have to follow the contractors around every day and make sure they're getting the work done. So sometimes it's a little easier, but you have to have the people to monitor it.
Mm-hmm. Is Amy still on the call?
I am here.
Okay.
So I think what we would need to do, and it's September now, right? Is just kind of look at his budget as it is right now and where he might be able to cover it within the budget without using salary savings for it. Because he probably does have some funding somewhere that we could utilize. But it's just getting those contractors now that the season's kind of almost over, maybe. Well, I guess it just started, didn't it? I don't even know where I am. I'm sorry. So, I mean, it's because I think the contractors are also having a little bit of trouble too, right, Jason? So sometimes when we call them, they can't always get there right away either. So it would be all of that, just kind of letting us look through the budget and see where he might have some funds available to do it and whether he can get the contractors out there to do it. And then bringing a contract to council if it needed to, for your approval to increase the contract amount. But all of those things we would just need to look at it all and see what we could do.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I know that's a little off tangent. Sorry, Councilmember Gregory, but I just thought it was pertinent, with the staffing, just finding out what, our staffing issues are in the rec department.
And some of what you just talked about are things that we will be talking to department heads about.
Okay.
How do we get creative about this to make sure that we have the kind of coverage we need?
Okay. And I don't know if it's, in West Ashley. I mean, I've been to enough of the parks over there to see some deferred maintenance as well. So I'm sure that it's citywide, not just, James Island specific. But thank you.
We're taking all of that into consideration too when we're looking at 2023, just trying to kind of determine where we are and what we need to do with some of these contracts as well. If we do need to increase some of the contract amounts based on our staffing issues and things like that. And if it's even feasible to do so, like I said, because some of those contractors are having the same issues we are. So we are, just so you know, we are taking all of that in consideration when we're looking at 2023 as well. Like, do we need to add more people if we can't hire people, or is that do we need to increase contracts? That kind of thing is what we're looking at. So.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Is there anything else we need to bring before this committee before we adjourn?
Move for approval, move for adjournment.
Before we adjourn, Councilmember Shealy, can I make one quick comment? I had shared some news with you last week that I'm excited to say now. I heard back from the candidate we offered the position of the business and enterprise manager position to, and they have accepted the position. So we will have that person joining our staff, understanding that I'm going to have to bring them up to speed really quickly and get going. But hopefully that's going to produce some revenue streams and some other partnerships in the private sector for the city Parks and Recreation departments. But I'm excited that he's accepted the position. He'll be joining us here in the next month or so as he and his family relocate from Florida. So that's great news.
Yeah, that's outstanding news. And thank you for all your work on that, Lori, because I know it was a long process before we finally got that yes. So thank you. All right. Anything else? If Jason, anything? Nothing? Okay. All right. If not, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all.